Tamara was the newest resident on Maple Street and the only black face in sight. When her friendly waves were met with averted gazes, she decided a batch of her mother's famous cookies might break the ice. She left a carefully wrapped package on Miss Annie's doorstep with a heartfelt note. 15 minutes later, the police came banging on her door. Maple Street had always prided itself on being a close-knit community. The houses stood in perfect rows, lawns meticulously maintained, and neighbors who had known each other for decades. It was into this picture-perfect suburban setting that Tamara Jones, a 28-year-old black woman, moved her belongings on a sunny Saturday morning. As she carried boxes from the moving truck to her new front door, Tamara noticed several neighbors peering through their windows. She offered friendly waves and warm smiles, not expecting the customary welcome that new residents typically receive. Instead, she was met with quickly closing curtains and turned backs. In the days that followed, Tamara made several attempts to introduce herself around the neighborhood, only to be ignored. When she walked down the sidewalk, neighbors would cross to the other side of the street, pretending to be deeply engrossed in their phones. One evening, as Tamara returned from work, she spotted Miss Annie holding court with several neighbors on her porch. All conversations ceased as they saw her approach. Something had to change. Tamara refused to live as an outsider in her own neighborhood. That night, she stayed up baking batch after batch of gingerbread, carefully wrapping each portion in cellophane tied with bright ribbon. If words weren't working, perhaps food might speak a universal language of friendship. The next morning, Tamara went door to door with her offerings. The responses were disheartening. When Tamara reached Miss Annie's house at the end of the street, she took a deep breath and knocked. After a long pause, the door opened just a few inches. Miss Annie's wrinkled face appeared in the narrow gap, her eyes cold and assessing. Tamara extended the gingerbread with her brightest smile. Before she could even speak, Miss Annie uttered words that made the air freeze between them. She informed Tamara that they did not need her kind of hospitality in this neighborhood. The door slammed shut with such force that the potted plants on the porch trembled. Standing there with the rejected gift still in her hands, Tamara felt a wave of humiliation wash over her. She turned to leave just as another neighbor was arriving home. This woman, unlike the others, approached with an outstretched hand and introduced herself as Grace, a lawyer who lived a few doors down. Inside Grace's home, over cups of tea, Grace explained the situation. Ms. Annie had controlled the social dynamics of Maple Street for decades. Her family had been among the neighborhood's first residents, and she viewed herself as its unofficial guardian. People followed her lead, even when they knew they shouldn't, afraid of becoming social outcasts themselves. Despite Grace's warnings about Ms. Annie's influence, Tamara refused to give up. This was her home now, and she was determined to find a way to belong. After a restless night contemplating her next move, Tamara decided to try once more with her mother's special recipe, cookies that had always brought her family luck through difficult times. The cookies came out perfectly, golden brown with hints of spice and her mother's secret ingredient, small pieces of candied ginger embedded within. She carefully arranged it in a beautiful basket with a handwritten note and dropped it at Miss Annie's door. She rang the doorbell and retreated to her own home. Through her peephole, she watched as Miss Annie cautiously opened her door, examined the package with obvious suspicion, then took it inside. Tamara felt a small victory. At least the cookies hadn't been immediately thrown away. 15 minutes later, the quiet afternoon was shattered by the sound of sirens. 2 police cruisers screeched to a halt outside Tamara's home. Before she could process what was happening, officers were pounding on her door, demanding she open up immediately. When Tamara complied, they ordered her to get on the ground, roughly handcuffing her as they explained she was under arrest on suspicion of attempted poisoning. Through her shock, Tamara heard them say that Miss Annie had collapsed after tasting the cookies and her cat had become violently ill after eating crumbs from the floor. As the officers led Tamara to the police car, she saw neighbors gathering on the sidewalk to watch. Ms. Annie stood among them, supported by 2 concerned residents, looking pale but very much conscious. At the police station, Tamara tried repeatedly to explain that there was nothing harmful in her cookies. The officers showed her photographs of the broken cookies, pointing to what they called suspicious substances. Tamara recognized them immediately as her mother's signature candied ginger pieces. The public defender assigned to her case seemed overwhelmed and disinterested. When they were alone, Tamara expressed her frustration. This situation had nothing to do with cookies or baking. She explained to her defender that this was clearly about the color of her skin and someone's determination to drive her from a neighborhood where she didn't fit the expected profile. As the preliminary hearing approached, several of Miss Annie's neighbors came forward to support her version of events. 3 of her closest friends even described how they had rushed to her aid when she called them after allegedly becoming ill from the cookies. Throughout these testimonies, Tamara noticed how the narrative being constructed portrayed her as an outsider with unknown and potentially dangerous motives. As the investigation deepened, it was revealed that over the past decade, 3 other black families had attempted to move into the neighborhood. Each time they faced bizarre accusations from Miss Annie that resulted in police involvement, and each family eventually chose to leave rather than continue fighting. The district attorney, noticing media interest beginning to build around the case, pushed for a quick plea deal. They suggested Tamara admit to a lesser charge of reckless endangerment, pay a fine, and agree to move from the neighborhood. In exchange, they would drop the more serious poisoning allegations. Tamara refused. She knew accepting any deal would be an admission of wrongdoing where none existed. Her resolve strengthened when Grace unexpectedly visited her one evening. Grace appeared nervous but determined as she revealed she could no longer stay silent. The day of the hearing arrived with unexpected drama. The courtroom fell silent as Grace took the stand, visibly nervous but resolute as numerous neighbors from Maple Street watched in shock. Grace testified about the pattern she had witnessed over the years. Ms. Annie's orchestration of complaints against minority residents, her boasting about keeping the neighborhood pure, and the social pressure she applied to ensure other residents followed her lead. A veterinarian's report was entered into evidence, confirming that the symptoms experienced by Ms. Annie's cat were inconsistent with food poisoning, but matched perfectly with an allergic reaction to medication that Ms. Annie herself administered. Most surprisingly, 2 more neighbors stepped forward. One presented text messages where Miss Annie had explicitly discussed strategies for keeping the neighborhood clean of undesirable elements. Another shared recordings from neighborhood meetings where Miss Annie outlined methods to make newcomers who didn't belong feel unwelcome enough to leave voluntarily. Faced with this mountain of evidence, the judge dismissed all charges against Tamara. Miss Annie faced penalties for filing false reports and animal cruelty for misusing her pet's medication to support her fabricated claims. The neighborhood association, deeply embarrassed by the publicity surrounding the case, organized a formal welcome party for a new black family that was moving in just a few blocks away. A week after the hearing, as Tamara worked in her front garden, a shadow fell across the flower bed. Looking up, she saw Miss Annie standing there. The neighborhood influence she once wielded now visibly diminished. Miss Annie admitted quietly that she had been wrong for a very long time. It wasn't much of an apology, but it is a good beginning. What would you do if you found yourself unwelcome in a place you called home? Would you fight to change minds or simply move on?